Have you ever noticed that some of the most thoughtful, spiritually awake people around you are slowly stepping out of the spotlight? They leave social media, move away from careers that once defined them, even distance themselves from communities they were once deeply involved in. Why is this happening? And more importantly, what does it mean for our society? In this video, we're going to explore why so many awakened individuals are quietly withdrawing from collective life, and how Carl Jung predicted this very pattern almost a century ago. We'll look at his ideas of the collective unconscious, the collapse of the persona, the burden of seeing the shadow, and the archetypal hermit phase that often follows spiritual awakening. Most importantly, we'll uncover why this withdrawal is not failure or escapism, but an essential stage of psychological and spiritual growth. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the Mental Dose channel and join our Telegram community, where you'll get early access to new videos and insights on personal and spiritual growth. Now let's get started. To understand why awakened people withdraw, we need to start with Jung's idea of the collective unconscious. This is the hidden foundation of society, our shared myths, cultural archetypes, unspoken assumptions, and unconscious projections. Most people live immersed in this collective field without ever questioning it. It functions almost like the air we breathe, invisible, yet shaping everything. But when a person begins to awaken psychologically, when they integrate their own shadow and expand their awareness, the collective unconscious stops feeling invisible. It begins to feel heavy, even suffocating. Jung described this in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious in 1959, noting that the more conscious an individual becomes, the more intolerable it feels to participate in mass delusion. Conversations once taken for granted suddenly feel scripted. Social rituals feel like empty performances. Even career success may feel hollow, built upon roles that no longer align with one's authentic self. For the awakened person, staying immersed in collective unconsciousness is not simply unpleasant. It can feel physically and psychologically painful. This tension marks the beginning of withdrawal, not out of arrogance but out of necessity. As Jung himself wrote, one cannot remain awake in a room full of people talking in their sleep without eventually feeling the strain. Jung's concept of the persona, the social mask we wear to function in daily life, further explains why spiritually awake individuals pull away. The persona allows us to navigate roles: the professional, the parent, the friend, the citizen. But when individuation deepens, the mask begins to crack. Jung outlined this in 2 essays on analytical psychology in 1953. Once someone discovers the deeper truth of the self, returning to pure persona performance feels like suffocation. The workplace demands smiles and scripted answers. Social media requires curated identities. Families may expect conformity to tradition, yet the awakened individual feels that every role performed at the expense of authenticity is a betrayal of the self. Jung experienced this firsthand after his break with Freud in 1913. In solitude, recorded in the Red Book, he could no longer perform the role of the respectable Swiss psychiatrist. He built his stone tower at Bollingen as a sanctuary from social expectations, where he could live in alignment with his deeper self. Withdrawal, then, is not antisocial. It is pro-authentic. It is the refusal to continue living as a fragment of the self when one has glimpsed the whole. And as we'll see, once the shadow is integrated, what becomes unbearable is not only the mask we wear, but also the shadow society itself refuses to face. Jung's theory of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or project onto others, explains the next step of withdrawal. Integrating one's own shadow is a central task of individuation, but once this work is done, something changes. The individual begins to see the shadow everywhere in society. Wars, political debates, social media outrage, all begin to reveal themselves as collective shadow projections. One group disowns its own darkness and projects it onto another. They are the problem. They are evil. To the unawakened, this seems like a battle for truth or justice. To the awakened, it looks like unconscious material clashing in public view. Jung described this in Psychology and Religion in 1938, calling it the burden of seeing. Once you have faced your own darkness, watching society disown and project its shadow becomes nearly unbearable. Participation feels like complicity in a collective delusion. This is why many awakened individuals disappear first from social media. Platforms amplify shadow projection, turning every feed into an arena of unconscious blame. For someone who has integrated their own darkness, scrolling can feel like watching millions of people box with their own shadows while blaming others for the blows. At this stage, withdrawal becomes not only desirable but necessary for psychological survival. Yet it is not the end of the journey. The next phase shows why solitude itself is archetypal. Jung observed that individuation requires periods of solitude. He often turned to myth and archetype to explain this. Just as heroes retreat into deserts, caves, or wilderness before transformation, so too must the awakening individual step back from society. This hermit phase is not misanthropy, but psychological necessity. It allows the psyche to integrate what cannot be integrated under the pressures of collective performance. Silence becomes the medium through which the inner voice can be heard. Solitude creates the conditions for authentic growth. Jung himself entered this hermit phase at Bollingen. He described solitude as a fount of healing, necessary not only for his personal development, but for the insights that would eventually transform psychology. What looked like withdrawal was in fact deepening, a retreat required to cultivate truths too fragile to survive in the noise of collective unconsciousness. Before we continue, if this exploration is helping you see Jung's ideas in a new light, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear this message. And if you'd like to support the creation of thoughtful content like this, you can click the thanks button below. Your support truly makes a difference. Now let's dive back in. The disappearance of spiritually awake people is not permanent. Jung emphasized that withdrawal is a stage, not the destination. When they return, they do so not to rejoin unconscious society, but to live at its edges, spaces where authenticity can survive. They may reappear as artists creating from the depths, as healers guiding others through awakening, as teachers speaking to small communities rather than mass audiences. Their return is selective, their contribution quieter but more profound. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly among his patients. Those who individuated rarely resumed their old lives. Instead, they built new ones, simpler, more authentic, and deeply aligned with the self. This is why Jung believed that the withdrawal of awakened individuals is not abandonment, but evolution. The pioneers disappear to build new spaces, new forms of life, and new structures of meaning. Later, others follow. What looks like absence is in fact preparation. So, when spiritually awake people disappear from society, it is not weakness, failure, or avoidance. It is part of an archetypal process that Jung recognized as central to individuation. They withdraw to escape the weight of collective unconsciousness, to shed the false mask of persona, to bear the burden of seeing society's shadow, and to undergo the hermit phase of integration. And eventually, they return, not to resume old roles, but to bring gifts forged in solitude. If this resonates with you, I invite you to share your perspective in the comments below. How have you experienced the pull to withdraw? What does solitude mean in your own journey? Let's create a space of dialogue here. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the Mental Dose channel for more explorations of Jung's psychology and the spiritual path of individuation. Your engagement helps keep this conversation alive. The disappearance of the spiritually awake is not an ending. It is an evolution, And it is through this evolution that society too may one day awaken.